James Scouller, welcome to the Star Coach Show.
Thank you, Meg.
I am delighted to have you here. We were talking pre-interview about the fact that our exploratory call was 100 years ago because life happens. And just been so excited to be able to bring your expertise forward. We're going to be exploring the psychology of teams and what's it like to work with a team and what's a real team versus a pseudo team. Like many things for all of you listening to stay tuned and really dive into. And what is it about James that makes him a good person to talk about this? Well, did you know that research shows 75% of business teams fail? So it's clear that there's a real struggle there. Why do we find team building so hard? And how many of you get brought in to do team building and wonder, how effective am I being? Like what do I really need to know to be able to help move this team forward? Yay for you. I've got James here, and that's exactly what James is going to help us understand. He is the man of the hour. He is the man that has been doing this work. And after being a CEO for over 20 years, he's been coaching leaders on how to make their teams effective. He's been coaching their teams to be effective. And he's just released, drumroll please, a trilogy, How to Build Winning Teams Again and Again. So there's so many things, James, that are so great about having you on the show. First of all, you took what you needed as a leader and you put it into a book. Isn't that, I mean, like, you now can look at your books and say, I sure wish I had these when I was trying to do my thing. And I think that the people listening can relate to that. Often we have walked a path and learned from that. And that's what's ended us up in coaching. Like over and over again, I train over 100 coaches a year. And I can tell you over and over again, I work with brilliant people like you who say, oh my gosh, I've walked the walk. Now I want to help others. So super excited to have you here all the way from across the pond. And I would like to kind of stop talking myself and say to you, what's this winning teams trilogy really all about?
It's about the psychology, it's about the action principles, the building principles, and it's about the roadmaps to team success. So, book one says this is what you need to know about teams. This is what a team is. This is what a team isn't. This is what you can have as an alternative to a team called a performance group. It gets into what I call the team progression curve, explaining the different kinds of units. And above all, it gets into the psychology of teams, the hidden forces making it harder to form a team, and the commit, combust, combine model. So that's book one, the stuff you need to know, particularly the psychology. Book two says, okay, if that's the psychological stuff you need to know about, here's a 7-principle action model for nailing those issues. So basically, apply this model skillfully and you will deal with the issues described in book one. Book three says, yes, but there is a slight complication. The way you apply the 7-principle model will vary a little bit according to the context. Is this a brand new team? Is this a typical team that's pretty so-so and needs to raise its game? Or is this a team in dire trouble and the business is going to go under unless it does something dramatic? So book three offers what I call the team fixer diagnostic tool for helping you understand the chief psychological issues and then matching it to the actions you should take. And it has a big frequently asked questions chapter, questions supplied by my clients and ex-clients, by the way. And it actually does offer a chapter on how to apply all the models and tools to team coaching. So here's what you need to know, book one. Here's what you need to do, book two. Here's how to do it, book three. That's the idea.
Love it. And because we need to know, we're going to primarily be leaning into the concepts for book one, but that's going to whet your appetites, no doubt. And we will be giving you links to connect with all of James' work. He actually has a little something special for you that we'll talk about at the end of the interview. So, with that, I would say, I think so many of us have a book within us and have that maybe wonder where the inspiration comes from. So, what would you say? What really inspired you to write
Mm.
not one, not two, but to put it into a trilogy, 3 books on this?
Yeah, my wife asked the same thing. She said, "No more damn books after this." She didn't say it quite as politely as that, I have to say. I've cleaned it up. Um, for some reason, when I became a CEO, I was fascinated by teams. I can't tell you why. I just found them intrinsically fascinating. And I used to make notes to myself on what I thought were the fundamentals. I've seen those notes since, and they were pretty basic. I didn't know then what I know now. But what really triggered me was, I spent over 20 years now as a coach to individuals and teams. And what became obvious to me was pretty much all of the teams I was coming across, and I generally came across senior teams, they weren't working well. They were pretty poor teams. So that was my experience. That was my observation. And then in 2015, there was a fantastic article written by a guy called Behnam Tabrizi. It was in Harvard Business Review. And it involved about 100 teams. And that's when he found that the 75% of them fail for one reason or another. So I thought, so there's the data. So we've got something that is really important to business success or any kind of organizational success. And not only that, team life makes an enormous difference to how our working experience feels. I mean, it's horrible. Anyone who's worked in a bad team knows that's a very unpleasant experience. So we've got this thing that has a big effect on our working lives. It has a huge effect on our organization success. And generally, we're bad at it. So you're laughing, but I mean,
Because it's kind of pitiful.
it's sort of, why hasn't somebody gone to it? Now, there are books on teams out there. And then I asked myself, so why are we so poor at it? And that's when it eventually hit me, because generally most of us don't take the challenge of learning the art of team building and team rejuvenation when teams break up, and they always do. We don't take it seriously. So when I started asking clients, so how long have you spent consciously learning how to build teams and turn around teams? And I might start at, so 2 months worth of coaching or reading or studying or training, 1 month, 2 weeks, 2
15
days.
minutes.
One or two said they'd been off for a bonding session in the woods, which hadn't helped them at all, but it meant they were damn cold at the end of it. We weren't taking it seriously, and yet we expect doctors to go away and train for 6 or 7 years. Architects the same, lawyers for 5 or 6 years, accountants for 2 or 3 years. Yet we wander into a room and sort of assume that we'll be great team leaders and we'll be great team builders, and we all understand what a team is and the disciplines it requires. It's complete rubbish. We're completely ignorant. So I just sort of said, I'll vote myself in and have a go at this.
Love that. Now, this is something that triggered for me while you were talking, in as much as when you coach teams, so you've been coaching teams for over 20 years, and you explore with them, how much time and effort have you put into learning about team building or team growth or team health or anything? How much, when you coach them, James, do you go into these concepts of, so basically, how much teaching is a part of your coaching?
I haven't actually been coaching teams for 20 years. I've been a professional coach for 20 years. I majored
Okay.
on one-to-one for most of the time. The team coaching has come in, I'd say, in the last 10 years.
Okay. Thanks
I
for the
keep the,
clarification.
yeah, I keep the, well, because I was still learning my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And this trilogy has taken on and off about 15 years to write and then sort of test it myself in action. I go pretty light on the educational side. I will usually explain what I call the team progression model, where I explain the difference between what I call a real team and a performance group. And that I find fascinates and grabs people's attention immediately. They get it intuitively, and the pseudo team as well. So I will describe that. That only takes 5 or 10 minutes to describe with a diagram on a flip chart or something like that. I I will mention the commit, combine, combust model, but I won't usually do any teaching on that until I'm closing out the assignment, and we'll look back at what they've experienced, and then we'll clove it with some intellectual frameworks. I generally find that with very able senior people, it's better that they experience it rather than you talk too intellectually, because they'll get into their heads, and they've usually got they've got excellent intellects, and they can fool themselves into thinking that if they've grasped the concept, they've grasped the reality, and that's just not so.
Love that. And actually, that's a great entree into let's talk about what is the difference between a real team, a pseudo team, that let's start there and set the stage for our audience.
Right. And here I must give credit to guys called John Katzenbach and Douglas Smith. They were the first people to coin the term pseudo team. I'd love to claim that that's my invention. It's not, it's theirs from early mid 90s. It's just that most people aren't aware that they came up with that brilliant term. So let me park pseudo team and go to real team and performance group. So a performance group, and at senior level, most so-called management teams, in my experience, are in fact performance group. So a performance group is a hub and spokes. There's the hub, these are the spokes, and at the end of the spokes are the different members. So you've got the official leader like the CEO, you've got the production chief or the IT chief or the digital chief, the finance chief, and so forth at the end of the spokes. And the work is done largely by the leader at the center, working individual with each of the people on the spokes. That's where they go into depth. They'll agree objectives, and the leader will follow up, and so forth. Now, don't get me wrong, they will get together to compare notes, to update each other, to make decisions. But the real work is done really in the pairs, with the person at the center coordinating it. And look, if that's enough, the sum of the individual efforts with a little bit of coordination and a bit of updating, if that's enough to get whatever results they want, it's an entirely valid model. So an example of a performance group in, say, the sports world would be a Ryder Cup team, the golf team. People call that a team, but in fact, you have the person at the center, the captain, and each of the players are largely playing. I know they sometimes play in pairs, but I'm parking that. That would be an example. So-called sales team. That's a performance group. It's an entirely valid unit. And I was working with a very, very big company. The guy who was coaching an £8 billion a year business, €8 billion business. And he was explaining that he had roughly 6 CEOs of very big businesses and roughly 6 functional heads, IT, HR, legal, and so forth. And he didn't see any serious product or market linkages between his businesses. And he was really sensitive about having expensive, powerful, capable CEOs scattered around the world, sitting in what he felt were time-wasting meetings. So they would have a meeting once a month of about an hour. Those in Paris, where the headquarters were, would dial in on video. Others would be there physically. They'd spend half an hour doing a quick roundup on what was going on. They'd have half an hour on an interesting topic of interest to them all, like how to improve on-time delivery to customers, and then they'd finish. And the rest of his time would be one-to-one in-depth sessions on whatever issues mattered to his people. And for him, a performance group model was consciously chosen, and he felt it worked until it didn't. Oh. So that's when we switched to a real team. So what's a real team for? A real team is, again, a group of usually up to about 12 in business. You could have it up to 15, but that's unusual. 12. But the difference is they're facing a challenge that absolutely requires them to solve a problem together, or create something new together, or execute something new together, or 2 or 3 of those, like to design a new car, or to create a storyboard for a new Disney animation thing. They cannot do it working in pairs. They are forced to get together in a room virtually or physically and create or solve or execute together, just like a football team or a rugby team using European type group models. So the difference is they've got a challenge which is so demanding, it absolutely requires collective work, collective outputs. So they've got a very clear challenge that is basically forcing them to operate this much more collaborative effort, if that makes sense. So real team, performance group, and the choice between the disciplines spins around what's the thing we've got to get done most of all. That then decides, does it require problem solving, collective creation, collective execution? Because if the answer is yes, then you need the real team model. No, then the performance group will suffice. And I do say to teams I coach, don't go for the real team model if a performance group will suffice, because it's an easier set of disciplines to learn. You don't need such psychological safety. You don't need such trust. You don't need the ability to handle conflict and tough feedback so well.
Okay. So you have sort of some guidelines for what kind of a performance team or performance group or a real team. Then let's dive a little bit more into pseudo. What's this pseudo that you've dangled in front of us?
Yeah, the pseudo team, unfortunately, is not rare in my experience. So the pseudo team says, so they're a work group, just like the other two work group units, and they've probably been performing as a performance group, although they probably didn't know the label. And they've decided that they need, philosophically, it's an ideological decision to become a team, to act as a team. But there's no clear, specific performance challenge that is demanding it. They're just doing it because, hey, it's the 21st century. This is what you do. And they assume that acting as a team really revolves around unity, harmony, getting on together. And that becomes the driving force for them. So they concentrate on teamwork. And now, don't get me wrong, teamwork, when I say teamwork, I mean helpful behaviors like active listening, helpful feedback, building on each other's points, showing sympathy, etc. That's all helpful, but that's as far as they go. Their number one aim is unity, harmony. And they overstress that, and they lose the performance edge they once had, their focus on results, because they're desperate to remain united. And they can often get into a state of groupthink. So I don't know if you or any of your listeners ever read the brilliant analysis by Irving Janis of the Bay of Pigs fiasco in the early 1960s. If you haven't, it's a brilliant psychological study. It was he, I think, who created the term groupthink, where a bunch of individuals who are individually highly capable people can sign up to a stupid goal or a stupid action plan or both. And that is exactly what happened in 1961. And the invasion of Cuba was a complete disaster. Everybody was either killed or captured. And yet afterwards, in interviews with Irving Janis, several of them, most of them, had serious misgivings about the goal or the plan or both, but they didn't speak up.
Say anything because they were in the group and everybody was
And
supporting
everybody wanted harmony, and they didn't want to disrupt anything and make life difficult to each other. So the pseudo team places all out effort on harmony and unity, which is not unimportant for a team, clearly, but at the expense of results and performance. And so this emphasis on civility and friendliness means they slowly dive down there, and then it usually ends badly with an awful lot of finger pointing and scapegoating and bitching behind the scenes as they realize they've taken the eye off the ball and they're getting criticism.
So this is really key, James. My bet is often our listeners will get brought into an organization around something around team building. Or, as a matter of fact, I just got an email the other day saying, we need a real cheerleader coach. We need a coach that's going to bring us together and help, bring up the energy and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but it's like, to your point, to what end? I mean, what's the big picture, and where's the balance in that? So I would encourage everybody listening to think about this concept that James is sharing and wonder if sometimes you get sort of engaged in a process that what's the overall big picture versus the one part is sort of what I'm hearing. Like, team building isn't bad, but it's not the be all end all. Is
Well,
that accurate?
team building, if the only objective is friendliness, civility, getting on with each other, having a good laugh, enjoying each other's company. I mean, a team is a work group. It is there to get something done that
Done.
individuals can't get done. I mean, it does have a serious side to it. Is there a social side to it? Of course there is. Is there an enjoyment side to it? Of course there is. Although, in my experience, it is far more enjoyable to be in a genuine team. I can remember the last corporate job I had as CEO. We were in a declining industry, and we were the leading company in a declining industry. So, being the leading company, we actually had most of the problems. And yet we had a real team ethos. And I would get out of bed every morning in this difficult business situation, almost bound out of bed, because I felt that my colleagues had my back. And as their leader, I had their back. We had a clear objective. We had a vision behind it. We were getting somewhere. And that is immensely fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
It is not fulfilling to be in a pseudo team.
Okay, great. Such helpful sort of framework to work from. And when we think about this working with a team, what advice would you give the coaches listening about how to even identify like what they're walking into?
That's really important. Just as I do with one-to-one assignments, I do some reconnaissance beforehand, just like a military person would. So with individual assignments, I will usually have what the typical chemistry meeting of about an hour to see if we get on. And then if they want to go to the next step, I'll usually say to them, can I talk to maybe half a dozen of your colleagues about you to get an idea of what they think you should be focusing on coaching wise? And then we have a big coaching goals session. I've transported the same sort of reconnaissance philosophy into team coaching. I do it slightly differently. I have a set of open-ended questions I ask, exactly the same questions to all members of the team, one-to-one, either face-to-face or over Zoom like this. And I also ask them to complete online a questionnaire based on my 7 principles model. So I've got data, and I use that to hypothesize what I think is going on based on the facts. It doesn't mean I'm exactly right. And then I'll start to say, okay, so the coaching path could look like this. And then I will ask to meet them together for a one-to-one up to 2.5 days. So it could be a couple of sessions where we will work on their number one goal. So I will say to them, and by the way, this assumes that I've learned through the conversations that they know why they exist as a unit. I should bring this out. This is what I call their basic purpose. And too many of the texts on teams and purpose don't differentiate between what I call basic purpose and team purpose. So do they all agree on why they exist? And I found at senior team level, they usually do, but when they don't, it is a killer problem, particularly if they are a senior team with various businesses underneath it. And they haven't actually figured out whether they're going to act as the kind of the holding company of a conglomerate and give a lot of freedom to the individual units, or whether they're going to control directly, whether they're going to try to add value through culture or competencies or what. So that's extremely important. assuming I haven't noticed that as a problem in the sort of the assessment phase, we'll then work on what I call their motivating purpose, their number one goal. That, figuring out their number one goal, which is the most important thing they've got to get done in the next maximum 12 months, which I find is a crucial step for starting the uniting and galvanizing process, but also gives us the information we need to make do we need to act as a team or performance group? So we'll spend a day and a half, excuse me, on that. And then once we've got that nailed, we will then answer okay, so does that require us to act as a team or performance group? And then I will feed back the data I've got for them in a very, very digestible form and say to them, essentially, what concerns you most about the data you're seeing? I won't present it. I found that's a really bad idea. Don't act the consultant, I've learned. Give it to them, ask them what they make of it, what bothers them most, and we'll flip it and we'll use that to define 2 or 3 coaching goals in the form of a theme with some what I call evidence points. This will tell them whether they've achieved that or they're getting closer to it. So that's how I sort of set up the coaching assignment.
And I just want everybody to hear the amount of dedication and time you're putting into that to get the info. And then when you said I give them the data, so somehow you've put it in a report or you put something that you literally, that everybody sort of digests together versus you standing at the front of the room.
Absolutely.
Presenting.
Yeah, it's a real no-no. When I was going through team coaching courses, we experimented with having the person act as a consultant, telling us what the issues were. And even though this was role play, this really annoyed us. We were all quite clear when we this is irritating. So you've got to find a way of giving them on like a one sheet of paper, maybe 2-sided, very colorful. Here's the data. I will say one other important thing that might help your listeners. Before you even get down to work with them, I have found that you're often brought in by the CEO and maybe an HR person, and they'll be really keen. They think coaching will be just the ticket. I should have realized earlier on, and I've realized it now, that just as I won't coach an individual client unless I am clear that they're really up for coaching, they're going to put the effort in, they've taken it seriously, they've got a need. I would recommend that every team coach faced with a potential team coaching assignment asks to meet the whole team together to find out whether they're really up for team coaching. And I found one good way of doing that is to ask if you can have an hour and a half or 2 hours at their next meeting and go there and be ready to explain what your philosophy is, what your typical coaching pathway or roadmap looks like. And ask 1 or 2 questions yourself and just gauge, are they serious? Are they up for it? Do you sense there's enough self-awareness? Because if they're not ready, don't do it. It's soul destroying trying to coach a team that doesn't want to be coached.
Soul destroying. that is really, really helpful. And what that really emphasizes to me is that the onus is on us as the person being brought in to determine through our eyes of expertise also, is this team ready? Is like, because to your point, if everything is a struggle from get-go, you're not getting the results you want. You said earlier, we really need to focus on the results, which I love because that's the name of my company. I focus on results. But I was like, yes, we focus on those results. So I really want to be sure that we get to this whole concept of let's see, it is commit, combust, combined. What the heck is that all about?
Well, that is a psychological model that coaches, well, anyone, but particularly coaches can use to get an understanding of what psychological issue is foremost. So in the first book in the trilogy, there is a model in, I think it's chapter 2 or chapter 3, where I'm really only making one point, which is there's an awful lot of stuff happening under the hood, as you would say in the States. Subterranean psychological forces that are going to get in the way. And if you are not aware of them, you'll end up a victim to them. And it means that you've got to put conscious effort to become a team and act as a team and stay as a team. That particular model, though, isn't very good for analyzing what the hell's going on and therefore what you should do first. That's when I brought in the commit, combust, combine model. And again, I must give credit to a brilliant American who died about 15 years ago called William Schutz, which most people now ignore. And his work is genius. He was the initiator of the FIRO psychometric tool. But what most people don't realize is the FIRO-B tool that he created was obsolete, has been obsolete for over 40 years now. And he wrote a theory book in the late 50s, and then he built on it through to the late 80s. So I've taken that model and applied it to teams. So what I'm saying is there are really only three major issues that you've got to address and navigate through if you're going to become a real team or a competent performance group, but particularly a real team, and stay there. So commit. Commit is essentially, am I going to engage seriously in this work group or not? And the answer basically has to be yes, at least for now, for us to pass commit. So anyone who has joined a work group will recognize that this is the first issue they face. And by the way, this is before trust and psychological safety. Let's get that clear. That does come into the model, but it's not the first thing. So let me sort of list the kind of questions that anybody, and I hope people listening to this will think, oh yeah, I've asked those questions. So let's say you're joining a new group. It's either brand new or you are the new person. You will be asking questions like, is this going to be a good group? And once I'm in it, do I feel included? Do I feel recognized for my capability and my potential contribution? How is the leader treating me? Can I sense a possible, value-adding role for myself? What is the purpose of this group? What are we trying to achieve? Do I like that? Does that excite me? Does that motivate me? And essentially, you're looking for a sense that I think there is a role for me here. I feel included based on their attitude and behavior towards me, particularly the leaders. And I like what we're trying to accomplish. You know what? At least for now, my hat's in the ring. I'm in.
Sign me up. Okay.
That's really the essence to commit. And you've got to get either all of the people or at least a critical mass of the people through that to navigate to the next issue.
Makes sense.
Am I suggesting that a heck of a lot of would-be teams out there haven't navigated that phase? I would say I have not done a big study, and I'm not an academic, and I never will do a big study. It doesn't excite me. I think a very large proportion of would-be teams haven't even got through that.
I would, based upon my 30 years experience, I would agree with you.
Yeah, sometimes the basic purpose is missing. Sometimes that's fine, but they've not figured out their motivating purpose. The number one goal they've got to get done in the next 12 months, which is a great device for getting commit, by the way. It's not the only thing you need. So that's commit.
Okay.
When most people are through commit, that's when the next issue kind of zooms in, and there's no clean cutoff. So there's like a fog receding and fog increasing. It's a bit like that. In comes what I call combust. And I guess a lot of the listeners here will know about the old form, storm, norm, perform model. That was partly based on Will Schutz's work. And Bruce Tuckman, who developed that model, he was quite self-depreciating about it. He used to joke that it really only became well-known because it had the neat rhyme, form, storm.
Gotta have that.
Yeah. It was neat and it was clever. It's memorable, so it helps, but it didn't have a lot of psychological depth behind it. But the storm phase is similar to combust. This is where now the power struggle starts. And there is always a struggle for power in a would-be team, and it's an entirely healthy thing to happen. And frankly, if you think about it, if it's not starting to happen, you've got a problem. So the combust issue only rises to the surface when enough people have come through commit. Why? Because if not enough people have committed, they won't give a damn enough to
I was
bother with
going
the
to
power
say, there's
struggle.
no level of investment. Yeah.
That's it. So now what's happening subconsciously and in people's minds during combust? They're going to be asking themselves questions like, and decisions and follow through and decisions are central to the combust issue. How do we make decisions here? Is there a clear process? Who has the most power over the decisions? What power do I or influence do I have over those decisions? And am I happy with the amount of power and influence I have over it? And by the way, we don't all want the same kind of power or the same kind of influence. Some people want to have very obvious power in the room. Some people like to be a bit more Cardinal Richelieu, Eminence Grise, power behind the throne-ish, which isn't always helpful. So we're asking about decisions. How do we make decisions around here? Do I like the way we make decisions? Do I like my role and influence over that? How well am I settling into the role I thought I saw for myself in commit? And does that give me the influence I want? Does that mean I can use my strengths, my talents for that? And as a result of all that, do I sense some order and structure starting to come through here? Again, if enough people are saying a big yes to that, you're navigating through combust.
Okay.
But I will pause here and say, for the coaches listening, pay attention to how the team makes decisions. Have they ever actually made a decision about how they're going to make decisions? I know that sounds silly.
It sounds a little meta, but it makes sense.
Yeah, well, I find that no team that I've ever met has actually had a decision. So I will say to them, so how do you do it here? Do you have a chat and then the leader decides, which, by the way, is a very performance group way of working? You have a chat, the team decides, or you're more democratic. You have a chat, a debate, and then you vote, and whatever is in the majority, wins the day, even if the leader's in the minority. And there's yeah. So there's about 5 or 6 possibilities that I'm aware of. You bring in consultants and they tell you what to do, blah blah blah. So that's one very good way of getting that out, because I remember one team I coached. I said, "How do you make decisions?" And they broke into small groups to discuss it, and then they came back, and the summary, which is somewhere in the second book, was like this. Sometimes we have a debate and X decides. Sometimes we have a debate and we think we've decided, but then we come back next month and we realize nothing's happened and we haven't decided. So we have another debate and then it goes on ad nauseum. Sometimes we have a debate and then nothing emerges and time's up. And then we find that somebody's made a decision in a smoky, dark room involving the CEO and maybe one or two people. And it's what the French call a fait accompli. We come back and some of us agree with it and some of us don't, and then we're disgruntled. To be honest, it's all pretty murky. I couldn't tell you how we make decisions, and half the time we don't, and that's our biggest problem. Decisions take months and months to happen. So combust is all about our sense of power and influence and role, particularly around decisions and the follow through on those decisions. And people are going to get comfortable with, I understand how we make decisions here. I understand how we act on those decisions. And I'm okay with my influence and my role in the decision-making and the follow-through. That's the essence of it. Okay. It is rarely about shouting and screaming. There's more often passive aggression and silence and disgruntlement.
And it's not about going up in flame and disappearing.
No, that would probably be more helpful on occasions, frankly. That would be more honest. But very senior teams don't behave that way. It's all much more, let's be adult round here, even though we're boiling with rage inside.
Interesting. Okay, so we've talked about the importance of commit, combust, and then we fade out of combust into combined. What does combined look like?
Right. So combine is slightly more complex in that it's like a coin with 2 sides. Side 1 is essentially about trust. Side 2 is whether my focus is on me or the we. But the trust thing comes first. This is where psychological safety comes in. This is where so again, these are the kind of questions we'll be asking ourselves. Right. Are we telling the truth here? Are people saying what they're really thinking, they're really feeling? Am I? Who is telling the truth here? Who can I trust here? Can I really be myself and be liked and respected? So those kind of questions will be going around. So if you're going to become a real team, eventually the answers to that have to be yes, we are telling the truth here. It is okay to disagree with something or ask a naive question or make a out of the box suggestion. It's okay. And we know from the Google research, and we know from other people's research, and Amy Edmondson has written that this is an important component, and it is. But as I say, it doesn't come in commit and it doesn't come in combust. We know from Will Schutz's research that the engagement, the commit thing and the combust thing just seems to come before trust. So that's the first half of combine. The second half, which can start to emerge when the trust thing comes through, is now people are looking at themselves. And you've got to understand throughout commit, combust, and the first half combine, really all of the emphasis, the focus has been on me, my concerns, my needs, my fears, my desire, and how do I cope with that? So there's been a defensive element to all of it. Now we're saying, okay, given what the team wants to achieve, and my commitment to it, am I now prepared to say to myself that what the team needs to get done is at least as important as what I want to get from this experience? So, and therefore, what does the team need from me, and am I prepared to do that?
So this is when we would maybe go from a me to a we.
That's exactly right.
With that combination.
And everything that's come before influences that, particularly the importance of the goal. Does it fit the situation? Is it important to my values? How does it help people out there, like customers, like fellow employees, and so forth? So that's what you've got to get through.
So good. So I could talk to you and talk to you. You are you bring this beautiful sort of energy around this, as well as your expertise that is just such a gift. Unfortunately, our time is coming to an end. So let me ask you this, as we are wrapping up this topic, and we know that you've got much, much more that you could talk about because we just touched on book 1 and you've got book 2 and book 3. What is sort of the way that you would like us to maybe wrap up and walk away with some key, what's the thing that you want to wrap up with?
I would say, as a coach, if you can get the team to figure out, and it's not as straightforward as you think it might be, figure out the number one thing this group of people has got to get done in no more than 12 months. Typically, the window is 3 to 12 months. And I say no more than 12 months because you need to have a here and now feel to it, because then that creates a sense of urgency. If you can get precision around that, and by the way, make sure it's not just intellectual, that they are emotionally invested, they give a damn about it, they will feel really bad personally if they don't achieve the it, whatever the it is. If you can get that clear and make sure they've got 1 or 2 metrics to verify whether that's happening, and they found a method for making sure they don't forget it amidst the busyness of life, that alone will make a substantial difference to their results and their performance as a team. And it will make a difference to your coaching, I would say.
So helpful. How can people learn more about you and connect with you?
Well, as usual, I'm easily found on the internet. The moment you write books, you become very easily found, LinkedIn and so forth. But I would recommend people go to what I call my platform website. It's leadershipmasterysuite.com, leadershipmasterysuite.com, leadership mastery suite, all one word, suite spelled SUITE. And if they then add a / SCS for Star Coach Show, they will go to a special welcome page where I've got 3 free gifts for them, basically 3 tools to help them with their team coaching, or if they're working and leading in a team, to help them with team building.
Love that. So we will have links to that in the show notes for this episode, as well as if you're watching us on YouTube, it's right below this video. So, James, I once again want to thank you for taking your time to join us today. I want to encourage everyone to come back every week to the Star Coach Show, where we share strategies, tools, and resources to help you as a coach, to help you lead and engage with your teams in a way that might just change your week, your day, your year. And I want to emphasize the fact that we are all here on this earth together. So let's be kind to ourselves, be kind to one another. Let's do the heavy lifting together. And as always, thank you for being a listener of the Star Coach Show. James Scouller, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.